This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is a nightmare for communities desperately trying to recruit and retain family doctors. A physician recruited to work for a decade in a northern Manitoba community left after just 16 months and is now being sued in court. This at a time when about 6 million Canadians, or 1 in 5, don't have a family physician. Karen Pauls explains.
The Paw, Manitoba, population 5,600. It's more than 600 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, and it's where Dr. Andrea Wilson agreed to work for 10 years after graduating from the Family Medicine Residency Program at the University of Manitoba. According to court documents, Wilson signed a $100,000 loan agreement and agreed to work at least 880 clinical hours every year between 2020 and 2030. A social media notice posted by the Northern Health Region welcomed her to the community. But court documents say Wilson left the Paw 16 months later. She moved to Vancouver and was hired by a clinic that posted a notice heralding her arrival. She's what you always hoped family medicine could be and should be. Wilson has since moved to another Vancouver clinic. Meanwhile, the Paw Community Development Corporation demanded repayment of the loan by December 31st, 2022. The defendant has refused and/or neglected and continues to refuse and/or neglect to pay the loan.
But sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's absolutely devastating to a municipality and to a region and to the residents. And ultimately, they're the ones that are truly hurt by this.
Recruiting and retaining family doctors is an ongoing challenge for remote and rural communities. And this is a nightmare, says this municipal leader, who is commenting generally and not on this specific case.
Not only are they out financially for some sort of incentive that's been provided, but also the fact that they've lost this, this caregiver now.
But some physicians groups say doctors and nurses don't have to live in a community full-time to do a great job for their patients. Dr. Nadine Gilroy splits her practice between Norway House Cree Nation and Winnipeg.
You would be hard-pressed to find a physician that wants to abandon their patient. A physician who has worked in a location for more than a few months is going to feel a great responsibility to the patients that they have in their practice and to the people that they look after and the community that they're trying to be part of. And so I don't believe that these decisions are ever made lightly.
Dr. Wilson couldn't be reached for a comment. She has until the beginning of December to file a statement of defense. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Less than 2 weeks ago, a patient died after waiting 33 hours in the hallway of a Winnipeg emergency room. Today, the province announced that hospital is getting some new relief. For more on provincial politics today, we are joined live by the CBC's Ian Fraze. Ian, Grace Hospital will be adding new acute care beds. How will this help?
Well, the hope is that this will reduce congestion in the emergency department. The announcement today, 10 medicine and 11 surgical beds coming to the Grace, all by March of next year, and then 10 more beds after that in the year following. The announcement today for 75 staff within a range of disciplines. This will take up an empty wing of the 5th floor of the Grace Hospital. Health Minister Uzoma Asaguera says new beds are only part of this solution.
It's important for us all to understand that these beds will only work when we are committed to improving the flow of patients through the emergency department. These beds will only work if we remain committed to recruiting, to training, and most importantly, to retaining.
Well, we all know that without staff, a bed is just a bed. I do have questions about the NDP's ability to get these beds online without a corresponding staffing plan that addresses recruitment and training and retention.
Now, Ian, also today, the Progressive Conservatives called for the provincial gas tax to be removed from all fuels. The NDP government is planning a 6-month holiday from this tax, but marked gas used mainly by farmers isn't included. Is the NDP receptive?
No, they're not, Marjorie. Finance Minister Adrian Sala says basically anyone will be able to go to the pumps once this discount is in place and take advantage of the detail. Sala also says the government won't police the use of who is buying this fuel. But PC finance critic Abi Khan isn't satisfied by that explanation.
You can clearly read in the bill that it says motor vehicles on a roadway. Clearly. There's no confusion about that. A boat, an ATV, a farmer's truck, a combine, all those equipment are not included that are driving up the cost of living for Manitobans. The bill is very clear that it leaves out a lot of Manitobans. We are simply asking for amendments to make the bill better for Manitobans.
Now, Khan is also asking for this tax break to be made permanent. Remember, the Progressive Conservatives, while in government, never proposed this idea. But Khan says the PCs at that point had made other affordability measures, like 2 rounds of affordability checks. Marjorie.
Thank you very much, Ian. That is CBC's Ian Fraze reporting live tonight. A controversial school board trustee at the Louis Riel School Division has resigned. In a special division board meeting held yesterday, the other trustees voted in favor of accepting Francine Champagne's resignation letter, which is effective immediately. Earlier this month, Champagne was suspended for the 3rd time after an online comment decried as racist was brought to the board's attention. Family members of victims of the mass shooting on Langside Street are remembering their loved ones. Some joined community members last night around a sacred fire. 4 people were killed and a 5th person remains in hospital, but no arrests have been made. As CBC's Josh Crabb reports, the incident is having a far-reaching impact.
The mood was somber, but the support from the community helped a grieving family. Around 80 people gathered around a sacred fire Tuesday night with Beverly Beardy and her relatives. Beardy's 2 daughters, 34-year-old Crystal and 33-year-old Stephanie, were among 4 people killed in a shooting early Sunday morning in this West Broadway rooming house.
This is a tragedy to us all. Those are my nieces, and it's their family. They took a huge loss in their family, 2 daughters and 1.
Roberta Owen is the aunt of the 2 women killed. She says their mother Beverly is numb. Owen is remembering her nieces as jokesters with happy spirits.
These were mothers, these were sisters, these were cousins, these were aunties. They're human just like anybody else, and they didn't deserve none of this. They have children too.
Brad Beardy is a distant relative and a band counselor for the family's home community of Lake St. Martin. He says the First Nation is offering them its full support.
It's tough. I have no word inside me to tell the family, right, to give them comfort, right? It's very difficult.
Loved ones of 41-year-old shooting victim Dylan Lavalley were also at the vigil. His sister, Eve Lavalley, says he had the biggest heart.
He was a great brother. If I ever needed him, he was there for me.
29-year-old Melaluk Leseri Lesakel, originally from Kenya, was also killed. His family says they're not ready to talk. Others who knew Lesakel, a former University of Manitoba student, described him as a kind, quiet soul with a heart of gold. A 5th victim, a 55-year-old man, remains in hospital. Winnipeg police have no update on his condition. Officers have not confirmed whether it was a single shooter or multiple shooters. The Beardy family is hoping for those answers.
We don't know what happened yet, and we just don't want to disclose what we know right now, and we just hope whoever did this, has a heart to come forward and are brought to justice.
Investigators don't know why the victims were together at the home. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg police are asking for help to find a missing woman. 32-year-old Leah Keeper has not been seen since July. She was reported missing on November 21st. The last time she was seen was in the area of Salter Avenue and Selkirk Street. Keeper is 5'3" with a thin build. If you have any information that may help find her, please contact Winnipeg Police. A Winnipeg brewery took over a holiday tradition this year. A Christmas sign that says humbug, familiar to many Winnipeggers, found a new home at the brewery. But 2 days after it was put up, the owners have been asked to remove it. CBC's Zubina Ahmed brings you more.
This 6-letter word is a Christmas tradition for many Winnipeggers. This year, the humbug sign has found a new home atop one great city.
The humbug sign is about kind of that tongue-in-cheek nature of putting up a sign that actually is full of Christmas spirit and love and kind of community stewardship. So, we wanted to just kind of contribute to something that is very important to a lot of people.
The brewery created a replica of the beloved sign, which usually signs brightly on a balcony off Route 90 near Polo Park. This year, a tarp is covering where it should be.
The humbug sign has a long history in Winnipeg. There's a lot of kind of seasonal fanfare around the sign.
It went up on Monday, but now has to come down. Brewmaster Scott Barber says the landlord asked them to remove it.
There's a lot of Winnipeggers who love the sign. A lot of the comments online was that Christmas didn't begin until the sign went up. So there was a lot of joy that it brought.
In 1973, Sydney Farmer started this holiday tradition outside his apartment balcony on Queen Street's Ashbury Place. Says he is sad to hear the landlords asked for the sign to be removed. A year-old holiday tradition. He says even when his father moved out of the building in 2002, the caretaker kept putting it up until last year.
His brother-in-law, Art, built on this sign, and it's all with red lights. And then from that point on, every winter, my mom and my dad would go up on the balcony and wire it all up, light it all up, and the entire city of Winnipeg could see it.
He says he is sad to hear the landlords asked for the sign to be removed.
It's not a heavy sign. It's not causing any trouble. People in Winnipeg love to see it, and it's a shame to have to take it down. So I hope they don't. I hope they come up with an alternative.
He hopes the renovations on his dad's former apartment building are finished soon, so the Hamburg sign can light up the season again. Zabina Ahmed, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Now, CBC reached out to the building's owner but have not heard back. Advocates calling for the city to buy the LeMay Forest wanted to show members of the public what is at stake. They held a tour through part of the wooded area south of the Pembina, slated for a housing development. CBC's Cameron McLean reports.
Residents of the Behavioral Health Foundation in St. Norbert hold ceremonies in the LeMay Forest. Justin Starr sees similarities between the resilience of the land and people like himself going through the program.
A lot of Indigenous people have come to this program and healed, and kind of symbolic when I look at it, like how the land heals and how we're healing.
The Coalition to Save the LeMay Forest held a tour, possibly for the last time. Starting Friday, the developer Total Developments will close off public access to this section of the forest, possibly to make way for development. Curtis Alexson is also a resident at the foundation.
It would be sad to see all these trees and all the wildlife to be gone. It makes my heart hurt a little bit to hear that he wants to do that.
Philip Mayotte is a historian of St. Norbert. He likes to walk through the LeMay Forest dressed in traditional voyageur clothing.
To me, it just gives me a sense of the history and the heritage of the nature in this area.
It's amazing.
Jackson Kowalik is a photographer and grew up walking through the forest with his parents. He fears the impact that a housing development could have on the wildlife.
Where will the wildlife go? That's one of my biggest concerns. They won't have a home. We are their voices right now, and they don't have a voice.
A motion was made earlier this month to negotiate a purchase price for the land in order to save it from potential development. The Property and Development Committee held off on a vote until a city report about the forest is delivered in January. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The real estate wing of the company that owns the Winnipeg Jets wants more time to mull the purchase of Portage Place Mall. CBC's Bartley Kivas reports.
Portage Place, the beleaguered downtown Winnipeg Mall, will have to wait a little longer to find out whether it'll have a new owner. True North Real Estate Development is asking for 6 more months to decide whether to exercise its option to buy the 36-year-old property and embark upon a $550 million redevelopment.
Projects of this order of magnitude and this as significant as this just require ongoing alignment between, all parties that are involved, private sector, public sector, and otherwise.
The proposed redevelopment calls for a new health tower to rise above the east side of the mall, a residential tower above the west side, and the demolition of the glass atrium in the middle. True North Real Estate President Jim Ludlow says he doesn't foresee anything that could derail the project. Still, he wants to hold more community consultations to get things right.
We want to ensure that what we're hearing can form part of what we're doing, and that takes time.
One round of consultations revealed downtown Winnipeg residents really want a full-service grocery. That was already in True North's plans. The plans also call for community centers, offices, and a small amount of retail space. True North has a deal in place to buy the mall from its Vancouver owner. It needs all 3 levels of government to sign off on an extension to buy the parkade below the mall and the rights to build towers above it.
We're going to be happy to do what it takes through that arrangement to ensure that the redevelopment of Portage Place can move ahead, including whatever time is necessary to ensure that the parties who are interested have the opportunity to do the legwork towards their project.
If this extension is approved, True North will have until June 30th to pull the trigger on this deal. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg Police Chief Danny Smythe's contract has been extended. Police spokesperson Kelly Den says Smythe requested to stay on so he can complete his term as president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. That term runs until next July. Councillor Marcus Chambers, who chairs the Winnipeg Police Board, says Smythe has been offered a verbal contract extension.
The contract for the chief expires November 30th. And the board has agreed to allow the chief to continue on working, has provided a verbal contract that will allow him to continue working December 1st and going forward.
Chambers says full details of Smythe's contract extension will be made public at the board's next meeting late next week. Smythe has been Winnipeg's police chief for 7 years. Well, CBC meteorologist John Sauter joins us now. And John, I swear, we saw more snow at Halloween
yes, we did.
than we are seeing at the end of November.
I have some stats to talk about that, too, that we're going to start with tonight. But, you know, I remember a couple of years ago skiing, cross-country skiing over at Wildwood, and it was mid-season. It was groomed and everything was ready for winter. Not this year. Now, skiers and snowmobiles got to wait a little longer. Let's have a look at some of the numbers. And for these numbers, I accessed my friend Julian Corriveau on Twitter, well, formerly Twitter, now X, at JJCWPG. And boy, you look at the average date for snowpack, and I often tell people that's around November 15th. And a snowpack is at least 2 centimeters of snow that lasts. And really what we're talking about is the snowpack that lasts until spring. Well, I was surprised to find out today that when you look at the stats, it's actually November 25th. We do get trace amounts November 17th and 18th, and we certainly do get snow before Halloween, but it usually melts. And we had 39 centimeters of snow so far this fall, but it has pretty much all melted. And what we're left with is a very thin layer of snow. So people are starting to ask, are we going to have a brown Christmas? Well, other late snowfall years, 3 years ago, it was mid-December before we had any kind of an appreciable snow on the ground, 2 centimeters or more. We only had 2 centimeters on the ground at Christmas in 2011. It was early December in 2009, mid-December in 2002, and our last brown Christmas was 1999, so 24 years ago. And I was saying this earlier this week that Winnipeg has a 99% chance of having a white Christmas. So not time yet to get worried. -2 right now. We actually reached 4 degrees today. That's a +4. This cloud that is moving down from central Manitoba may supply a few flurries overnight, but it's not that snow cover that we're looking at. Just really an insignificant amount of flurries. You can see it here on Futurecast, and if I stop the map here at 10:30, you can see there's a real definite line here where we might just see a few snowflakes if you look up at the street lights in front of the headlights in the car, that sort of thing. A few of those overnight, but by tomorrow morning, a lot of that is moving out of the region, and we're left with a cooler air mass. But we're in a sun-cloud mix through Thursday and a slightly brighter sky as we work our way through the day on Friday. Looking at snowfall going forward, and there just isn't much of that. We go to tonight till tomorrow morning. We may get a centimeter around Portage or Winnipeg, and then take that out into Friday, and there just isn't much more snow at all. Let's do the same thing in the north. Up to 9 a.m., we've got a couple of centimeters over here in the Paw, 1 centimeter in Churchill tonight, but then you move that into Friday, and you get an additional 6 or 7 centimeters. And tomorrow we will see blowing snow in Churchill as well, with some snow falling tonight and tomorrow, and winds gusting to about 70 kilometers per hour. So a few snowflakes tonight. Tomorrow, it's windier in the morning than it is in the afternoon, and a high of -3. And then going forward, we are above seasonal, but still a little bit on the cooler side than we were today. -2s Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And Saturday, Marjorie, does look a little breezy. It looks like winds would be about 30 or 40 kilometers per hour.
All right. Thanks a lot, John.
You're welcome.
A message on a billboard in 3 major cities across Canada is looking to get the attention of men. It's a part of the United Nations 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence. Janelle Henry has more.
Where would we be without women? That's the question Clan Mothers Healing Village is asking. The Indigenous women's-led advocacy group is calling on men with this billboard to step up and stop violence against women.
I hope with my heart and soul there'll be a few brave men that will start a movement that we need so desperately, because we can't do it anymore. We're tired, nobody's listening.
Elder May Louise Campbell is on the billboard. She is the founder of the Clan Mothers Healing Village. She says without men being strong advocates to end gender-based violence, nothing will change.
Our women suffer so much, and I know I've been working with them for so many years already.
She hopes the campaign will wake up men to stand up for women. Krista Anderson is the project coordinator of this campaign. She designed the billboards.
When we were creating the campaign, I wanted to create a positive image or a positive message, something that was going to engage the men out there.
This photo of Campbell inspired Anderson for this project. She thought the image was powerful and wanted to see the same kind of photo for this message.
For anybody that knows Elder May Louise, we're all too familiar with how she talks to anyone. She holds their face and she looks at them in the eye.
Norman Mead is the elder in residence at the University of Manitoba. He says we all need this message.
You have to understand that their role is not that of abusing women and misusing women or using women as objects, but that their role is to be one of protectors of the women and want to provide for their families, right? Our young men need to understand that.
Billboards calling for action are also up in Toronto and Vancouver. Janelle Henry, CBC Indigenous, Winnipeg.
Another round of hostages and detainees are set to be freed today. Both sides say they're open to extending the truce. Israel has also asked it will restart its military campaign inside Gaza once the ceasefire ends. That story is coming up. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. More hostages and detainees were exchanged between Israel and Hamas today. A dozen Israelis have been sent home and 30 Palestinians are being freed. The truce that's allowing this process is scheduled to run out by tomorrow, and efforts continue to keep it going. Much of the world is calling for a formal ceasefire, but the leadership in Israel is under pressure to resume the fight. CBC's Evan Dyer reports.
6 days of relative calm have given a chance to take stock of the damage in Gaza. This was the scene in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The north is, if anything, even worse. Israel's prime minister is under pressure from his own coalition to resume the offensive against Hamas, and under pressure from the US, Canada and Europe to extend the current truce.
We call on this humanitarian truce to be extended. It is important that we have more hostages released. We need to make sure that there's more aid reaching Palestinian civilians, and we need to make sure that we get all Canadians out.
Today, Islamic Jihad, an ally of Hamas, announced that it had delivered a number of Israeli hostages to exchange for Palestinians held by Israel. Many families of hostages want the Netanyahu government to extend the truce. Today, Hamas claimed that 3 hostages, including the youngest abducted from Israel, died in Israeli bombing while in the hands of a different armed faction. Kfir Abbas is just 10 months old. Hamas claims he died together with his 4-year-old brother and their mother. CBC News has not been able to verify that claim. This relative says Hamas bears sole responsibility for their welfare.
He's going to have to bring them alive over here to Israel. And we really don't matter if they gave them to somebody other, like he gave them, he's going to have to find them.
True or not, Hamas's claim could increase Israelis' reservations about resuming bombing of the territory, where Israel believes 161 hostages are still being held.
We hope that the extension of this truce will get us to a much more lasting peace, which eventually can be done through a 2-state solution.
But the prospect of lasting peace seemed as distant as ever as the truce wound down, with Hamas still far from destroyed, and Israel's embattled prime minister pledging to stay on after the war, telling supporters that he alone can prevent a 2-state solution. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
U.S. authorities have laid criminal charges against an Indian national in an alleged plot to kill an American Sikh activist in New York. 52-year-old Nikhil Gupta is accused of conspiring to pay an assassin $100,000 to kill a proponent of an independent Sikh homeland. The charges come 2 months after Canada accused India of involvement in the murder of a Canadian Sikh activist in Surrey, BC.
Well, this newly unsealed indictment describes an alarming murder-for-hire plot earlier this year. Prosecutors say 52-year-old Nikhil Gupta of India offered an undercover agent posing as a hitman $100,000 to kill political activist Gurpatwant Singh Panun, who lives in New York City and runs a group called Sikhs for Justice, pushing for an independent state. Now, the indictment says Gupta was recruited by an Indian government employee to carry out the killing. Earlier, Panun spoke to CBC News.
Today, tomorrow, or day after, I don't fear the death. The physical death I do not worry about, because the issue, the contentious issue, is not the threat to my life. This is the existential threat to the people of Punjab, the indigenous people of Punjab, the Sikhs, who are facing existential threat under the successive Indian regimes.
The indictment also says Gupta discussed the killing of Canadian Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar just hours after he was killed in Vancouver back in June. Prosecutors say Gupta claimed there were 3 Canadians on the hit list, but it's unclear who. Now, all this raises 2 big questions. Number 1, how did the U.S. foil an assassination plot, but Canada did not? And 2, why was someone charged in the U.S. but not in Canada? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't answer those questions directly, but said this.
The news coming out of the United States further underscores what we've been talking about from the very beginning, which is that India needs to take this seriously. The Indian government needs to work with us to ensure that we're getting to the bottom of this.
Now, India has pledged to investigate the U.S. allegations, but has denied and denounced similar accusations from Canada. Gupta, meantime, faces several charges, including conspiracy and attempted murder. Richard Madden, CBC News, Washington.
And that was the CBC's Richard Madden reporting tonight. Well, back here at home, the federal government has reached a multi-million-dollar deal with Google after months of the web giant threatening to pull Canadian news off its search engine. It's in response to a new law that requires major digital platforms to pay Canadian news outlets for linking to their content. Kate McKenna has the details.
After months of threats from Google to pull Canadian news content from the search engine, a deal.
This is a deal, an agreement that is going to resonate around the world as countries and democracies struggling with the same challenges that our media landscape in Canada is facing with are going to look at this, and we're very pleased we were there.
The federal government says Google will pay about $100 million per year to Canadian news organizations, a compensation for linking to original journalism. That's less than what the government wanted, but welcome news for an industry that needs those clicks.
Google creates our information environment. It sounds like I'm overstating this, but you want to know something, you put in a Google search.
This announcement comes after the government passed a new law forcing web giants to pay to link to Canadian news content.
I think the government was looking for some way to salvage what had been a real mess. There was, I think, some amount of desperation on the part of both the government and the industry to find some deal.
The government calls this deal a win. But Meta, the parent company of Instagram and Facebook, has already blocked Canadian news links from their platforms.
Unfortunately, Meta continues to completely abdicate any responsibility towards democratic institutions and even stability, but we're going to continue to work positively in those areas.
But there are still questions of how Google's money will be doled out and who will be eligible, including the CBC. The agreement allows Google to work directly with one group that will represent all media, but the details of how that will work won't be released until next month. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Manitoba Theatre for Young People is inviting you to step through a magical wardrobe and experience a new musical adaptation of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. That is coming up. Stay with us. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. is a scene from MTYP's Christmas show. The Manitoba Theatre for Young People is inviting you to step through a magical wardrobe and experience a new musical adaptation of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. And it will have its world premiere right here in Winnipeg tomorrow. Narnia was created for MTYP by Bad Hats Theatre. Fiona Sauter is the artistic director for Bad Hats Theatre and the director of Narnia. Fiona, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks. You pulled me right out of rehearsal. I'm just out of the show and happy to talk to you.
Well, I'm so glad you could take the time to talk to us. What was the creative process like for reworking? I mean, this is a classic that a lot of people know very well, but what was it like reworking the writings of C.S. Lewis into a modern musical production?
Great question. Yeah, adaptation is basically the exercise of reading and rereading the book and noticing in yourself what parts sort of sparkle to you. And then you have the sort of wonderful but arduous job of turning up the dial on the things that you love and then turning down the dial on the things that you don't. And with a world like Narnia, the universe is so big and there's many, many chapters and novels in the series of the Chronicles. It's a lot to take in and fit into, you know, a 90-minute piece. So it's draft after draft and lots of reworking of the music and the text. And then eventually somehow it gets on stage.
Now, for people who are not familiar with the story, what's the message of Narnia?
So if you are familiar with the story, you may have sort of a semblance of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the back of your head. That's the novel that's the sort of primary narrative for our adaptation, but we've twisted it a bit to make it all about a found family and a remarkable professor who brings these children into her home and basically opens the door to curiosity and magical thinking. And it's really a nod to all the mentors, teachers, friends in our lives, these non-biologically related people who enter into our worlds and open the door to this way of being in the world with bravery, with curiosity, kind of the way that we all are as children when we begin. And so it's a big reminder to return to that sense of ambitious, hopeful way of seeing the world and reimagining it for ourselves in every season of our life.
Now, I know that this is being performed at MTYP, but what age group do you think that this show will resonate most with?
Well, we've set audiences 5+, but all of Bad Hats' shows are meant to be experienced by multi-generational audiences. There's nothing better than watching a grandparent with a grandchild gasp at the same thing or lean in the same way or laugh together in the theater. And so it's a great family experience. Well, whoever your family is, found or otherwise, it's for everyone.
Now, are there any particular songs or scenes in the show that are really close to your heart?
Oh, that's like picking a favorite child. That's hard. But my favorite song happens in the middle of the show when the spring happens in Narnia for the first time. It's one of those really human things that we can all connect to, that as a child, the wonder of how snow melts and how you suddenly become a different person in new seasons is really captured in that song. So that's a particular favorite. Also, you can't, go wrong with Lucy Going Through the Wardrobe. That's the first number in our show, and it's pretty magical. Audiences of the Manitoba Theatre for Young People may know Bad Hats from being here several years in a row. We've done 2 productions, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, and this is the 3rd in a trilogy. So we're really lucky to get to bring this to Winnipeg audiences at MTYP. It's such an amazing home away from home for us, and we can't wait for you to join us again.
Well, Fiona, thank you so much for joining us. And as they say in the theatre, break a leg.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Weather Update is brought to you by the Art and Beauty of the National Ballet of Ukraine, January 29th at the Burton Cummings Theatre. Tickets at nationalballetukraine.com.
Lots of holiday performances coming up. Yeah, so Narnia runs till December 20th. We saw the Ukrainian ballet there. Hey, if you're heading out, it's going to be dark by the time you get to those performances because we're seeing the sun setting and setting earlier.
We're at that time of year now when we only get about, less than 8.5 hours of daylight in a 24-hour period. Here's a look at some of the sunset times. 4:31 today. Now, let's go out over the next 3 weeks. And as we get into a week from now, we lose another 4 minutes at the end of the day of daylight, and we end up with a sunset at 4:27, and then it kind of hangs around 4:27 for about 17 days, well past 2 weeks from now at 4:27. And then as we get into December 20th, we start to see our sunset a little bit later again. Now, the solstice is actually on the 21st, but on the 20th, we start to see sunsets around 4:28. So The good news is it doesn't change much over the next few weeks. -2 right now in Winnipeg, still on the positive side of zero. Over in Eli, it's 3 degrees downtown at the Fork. So if you're out through the evening hours, pretty mild for this time of year and this time of day, certainly. There's a look at the rest of the south, -4 in Barons River, and up to the north, much, much cooler. Temperatures will actually rise a little bit tonight in Churchill as some winds kick in and start to bring in some warmer air, but there will be some blowing snow as well. We're still at -6 in the Paw, -14 over in Norway House. So tonight, we're not expecting much in the way of snow, just a few flurries in the evening hours for Kenora, Dryden, Red Lake, not so much in Fort Francis. Here in Winnipeg, I think late evening and a little bit after midnight, but no real accumulating snow. Down to -6 in Winnipeg, -5 in Steinbach, -8 in Lac du Bonnet and in Pinawa. And a few evening flurries as well through Dauphin and Swan River. Otherwise, just partly to mainly cloudy skies through Brandon, Portage, Morden, and Winkler. Across the north, we do have a little bit of light snow, maybe a couple of centimeters around the Paw. Winds out of the northwest, 40 gusting to 60 in Churchill, and temperatures hovering around -19. Tomorrow, those winds will be gusting to about 70 kilometers per hour, so some more snow and some blowing snow. Otherwise, it's pretty quiet across the north. Sunny to a sun-cloud mix, -14 for a high in Thompson, -17 over in Lynn Lake, and a little bit cooler here in the south, and generally a sun-cloud mix. So we'll take about 5 or 6 degrees off what we saw today. Tomorrow in Winnipeg, after a 4-degree high today, a high of only -3. -2, though, in Steinbach, and in Sprague, a little bit more cloud in the southeast corner of the province. Sun cloud mix, and anywhere from -2 in Fort Francis to -9 in Red Lake in northwestern Ontario.
Thank you very much, John.
You're welcome.
Coming up, north versus south. Talk of the Arlington Bridge replacement is decades old, and that's left people north of the tracks feeling more than neglected. We'll hear from 2 city councillors on the issue next. Stay with us. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. 1 week into the long-term closure of the Arlington Bridge, neighbors and commuters are now looking to McPhillips, Salter, or Main Street as the workarounds. This morning, Information Radio broadcast the show from a North End deli to hear how the bridge closure affects thousands of residents in the area. CBC's Marcy Marcusa spoke with City Councillors Vivian Santos, who represents Point Douglas, and Ross Eady, the councillor for Menarski. Here's a portion of their interview on how the city steers the bridge debate.
Your first words when I saw you this morning were decay, decay, decay. Can you elaborate?
Yes. Well, it's been going on since I was elected, and it sounds like historically forever. There's really no divide between the North End and the rest of the city. The only divide are the people who are making decisions don't represent the area, so they don't care, and because they have other political reasons. But the decay. Everything's decaying in the North End. We're doing investments in downtown, very important. I don't disagree. But look, we're not investing in the Dufferin neighborhood, which is the neighborhood right by adjacent on my side of the Arlington Bridge.
Yeah, it's the first street you hit.
Yeah, and then we have William White decay. So the big problem is, and I've said it's just constant. And I said to the former CFO, Mr. Mike Ruda, who was the CAO as well, I just said, this is not right. We're not taking care of our decay and moving forward. Let's take care of our decay and as well do growth. We can do both, but the problem is we get elected officials who make these flat promises about how much you can spend we're not making the need. So they do is what happens is the North End gets the wrong end of this stick, right?
Now, you say that we can do both, but can we do both at this stage? I want to talk about how long Arlington has been, struggling. You were saying, Councillor Santos, that even the two of you, you knew this may be coming, but you didn't maybe know that it would be this fast. So what was it like for you when it's closed last week, deemed that we have to close it? What are you hearing from residents?
Well, residents are wondering, where are they going to go now? Now most of this community walks and cycles and takes the bus. Now they have to walk 10 to 15 20 minutes to either to Salter or to McPhillips, or maybe they're not even going to walk anymore. They're just going to stay home, right, and not go out. And so that's in our current climate with mental health, we need to be outside. We need to be getting to our community centers. We need to be getting to our local grocery store. And those things are not going to be happening if they're going to be staying home or forced to stay home because now they can't cross Arlington Bridge. So those are important conversations that are happening, and as Councillor Eady had alluded to, we need those investments in our decay of our infrastructure. Are we going to be looking at what other alternatives and options are going to be made now for these communities who are directly affected? Are you now going to do more cycling infrastructure? Are you going to increase pedestrian access?
Could it be a moment could it be, just on that front before I turn back to Councillor Eady, could this be a moment, an opportunity for a vision, because we have arrived at the door, of Arlington having maybe no feasible future, who knows? But
well, the vision has always been to build the new Arlington Bridge. That has been the vision for the last couple of years, right? And both Councillor Eady and I have been advocating for a new bridge. Now that vision has come to a reality that maybe no bridge is being built, those are the conversations, us as leaders need to have with other stakeholders. Because right now, it's really hard to see that vision when it's always been a new Arlington Bridge.
Yeah, fair enough. And of course, that conversation involves money and huge amounts of money, because then we're talking about rail yards. I want to ask you, Councillor Eady, two things. One is about the rail yards, but the first one is actually building on what some listeners said. Viv Ketchum wrote in, she said, will this affect the closure, the response time for emergency personnel? And Judy Hershkovich wrote in and said, a lot of people use that route, over Arlington to get to the hospital. What's your sense of that, and is that a concern? What are you hearing from residents?
Absolutely. It is my concern, and as we heard from the history of the Arlington Bridge, It's never met the needs of the city for transit or for fire paramedic services, and it does have a really big effect. A lot of people actually who use Arlington go to work at the Health Sciences Center and all the different ancillary medical attention that you get there.
Now, I know that, Councillor Santos was just saying that right now the discussion has been, and the two of you have been advocating for a new bridge. However, let's talk about the rail yards for a moment here with the long history. This morning, they were saying that, moving the rail yards even, that discussion's even been going on for decades and decades. There was money on the table in 1972 from the feds. There was like 50% of a funding agreement way back then that the city at the time turned down, I understand. Is it time to re-engage in that conversation? And look at the rail yards and moving them and contribute to the $400 million to that $1 billion project instead of a new crossing. What are you hearing from residents? And is that maybe Councillor Santos first and then back to Councillor Eadie?
Okay, I'm going to be quite frank on this issue. Removing the rail yards is going to take years and decades to have that conversation. You got to realize this is CP land that owns it. The provincial government and the federal government need to be at the table to have that discussion to move the rail lines and renegotiate all the lease agreements that are there with CP and all the ancillary and all the lines that go into that feed into Inkster Industrial and Omads Creek and even across. So just having those discussions is going to take a long time to renegotiate the lease. And then say you do get the rail lines, like hypothetically you get the rail lines out of there, what about the land that has that needs to be remediated? Who's going to spend the money to remediate the land? And even if you don't remediate the land, you're going to take about 50 to 75 years before you can even develop. So those conversations, I'm going to be quite honest, are not going to happen.
Still ahead, John Sauter is going to be back with your 7-day forecast. Stay with us. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News.
Well, hopefully you had a chance to get outside today when it was sunny and 4 degrees to kind of enjoy the weather, because you know those days are kind of numbered now. -3 tomorrow, so a little bit of a cooler air mass moves in tonight. Might see a few overnight flurries, and then -2s pretty consistently going forward. Saturday a little breezy. Winds will be southeast at 30 to 40, but -2s for daytime highs through the weekend. Next week more like -4 to -5, and what really stands out here is the lack of snow. It continues. You might think that a pair of rescued sea lion pups would want to roar right back into the ocean.
Yeah, well, John, you would think, but you'd only be half right. Here is your daily lift. Two young female sea lions were released back into the wild in Southern California. One was raring to go, and as you can see there, the other, not so much. Both were rescued earlier this year, suffering from various infections and injuries. They were brought back to health by the Marine Mammal Care Center in San Pedro, California. Oh.
Yeah. It looked like it eventually kind of, warmed up to the water and got back in the ocean. So
I understand. It can be a little bit scary. Uncharted territory.
Timid. Good news story all in all, though.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here at 11 o'clock.
We'll see you.